Ashfield was one of those American towns that fit on a road sign between two other destinations. A town of nearly 30,000 people, with its own history, a small college, an industrial area, and the typical Midwestern American neighborhoods of neat houses and trimmed lawns. Everyone here knew each other, or at least pretended to. Mallory and Evelyn Carson lived in a two-story house on Oak Street, in a neighborhood the locals called decent, which meant neither rich nor poor, just average. Like most things in Ashfield 5 years ago, they moved in, full of plans and dreams: paint the walls, fix up the backyard, maybe in a few years fill the kids' room. Now the walls were the same beige color they'd been when they bought it, and the plans for the backyard were still in the kitchen table drawer among the magnets and bills. Tuesday morning was no different from any other morning in their lives. Mallory awoke to the sound of Evelyn's alarm clock, which she had already delayed twice. He opened his eyes and saw her back as she sat on the edge of the bed looking at her phone. Her dark hair was in a messy bun. She'd had a half hour in the bathroom to transform herself into the elegant office worker her co-workers knew her to be. "Good morning," Mallory murmured, getting no response. Evelyn probably didn't hear him over the sound of the water she had already turned on in the bathroom. Their morning ritual was perfected to the point of automatism. While she occupied the bathroom, he prepared breakfast. By the time she came out with damp hair and the smell of floral shower gel, there were already 2 cups of coffee and toast on the table. "Don't forget we're running out of milk," Evelyn said, sitting down at the table and checking her email on her phone. "Okay," Mallory replied, buttering the toast. "I'll be late at the shop today. We have some urgent orders." Mallory worked in a small furniture shop on the outskirts of town. He started out with basic tasks: sanding, painting, but over time he became a valued employee capable of creating complex wooden structures. In Ashfield, his work was considered good for someone without a college degree. "His hands are golden," customers said, which made up a little for the difference in career success between. Evelyn worked in the marketing department of a local pharmaceutical company, not a giant corporation, but large enough to have a presence in several states. Her office was in a glass building in the business section of town. She had graduated from college in Ohio and was proud of her position. She could be promoted to line manager in a year or two. Lately, their breakfast conversations had mostly consisted of exchanging information: who was coming home and when, what they needed to buy at the store, what bills to pay. Neither of them could say exactly when it happened, when the morning conversation stopped being filled with future plans or funny stories. Perhaps it happened so gradually that they didn't even. "Not yet," Mallory answered. "She probably wants to talk about her Thanksgiving visit. That's 6 months away." "You know my mom," he smiled weakly. "She likes to plan." Evelyn nodded, picked up her bag and headed for the door. Mallory watched her put on her shoes, a movement he'd seen 1,000 times but still found something graceful in it. "I'll see you tonight," she said without turning around. "Have a good day," he replied, but the door had already closed. The house was quiet after she left. Mallory looked at the unfinished cup of coffee and thought that their life was like a well-rehearsed play, where everyone knew their lines and moves. It wasn't that they were unhappy. It was just that, somewhere along the way, the excitement they had felt at the beginning of their relationship had been lost. Now they were moving with inertia, like a car rolling down a smooth road after the driver took his foot off the gas pedal. He remembered their first meeting. She had come into the shop to order a bookshelf. Mallory was just starting to work with clients on his own then. Evelyn was dressed in a strict office suit and looked slightly out of place among the sawdust and the smell of varnish. She knew exactly what she wanted: a shelf of a certain size in dark wood with a certain number of compartments. Mallory was impressed with her confidence and the way she described her perfect bookshelf. That shelf now stood in their living room, filled with books they had hardly opened since moving in. A symbol of the beginning of their relationship, and at the same time a reminder of how much things had changed. The evening came suddenly, as it often does on weekdays when time at work stretches out and then suddenly compresses to the moment they get home. Mallory arrived early, had time to shower and start cooking dinner. He wasn't a great cook, but he was quite good at simple dishes. Evelyn returned around 7, looking a little tired but with an unusual twinkle in her eye that Mallory didn't immediately notice. "Smells good," she said, walking into the kitchen and setting her bag on a chair. "Nothing special, just pasta and chicken," Mallory replied, stirring the sauce. "How was your day?" "Fine." She opened the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of wine. "You?" "The usual." They sat down to dinner, and the conversation flowed as usual: work, city news, weekend plans. Mallory noticed that Evelyn drank her glass of wine faster than usual and immediately poured herself another. Something in her demeanor seemed strange, as if she were gathering her thoughts for an important conversation. "Do you remember Fiona from the development department?" Evelyn suddenly asked as they were clearing away the dishes after dinner. "The redhead? The one who was at the corporate party last year?" "Yeah, her. She and I had an interesting conversation at lunch today." Mallory looked at his wife questioningly, waiting for her to continue. "She was talking about her friends." Evelyn paused, as if searching for words. "They have an open marriage. Everyone can date other people, but they stay together." Mallory said, putting clean plates in the cupboard. "How does that work?" "From what Fiona tells me, it's pretty good. They've established certain rules, respect each other's boundaries. She says it's even strengthened their relationship." Mallory shrugged. "To each his own, I guess. I'm not sure this kind of thing works for a lot of people." Evelyn took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. "Mallory, there's something I'd like to discuss." Something in her tone made him tense. They walked to the living room and sat down on the couch, not close together, but not on opposite ends either. Mallory noticed Evelyn nervously rubbing the hem of her blouse, a gesture that only occurred to her in moments of great excitement. "What's the matter?" he asked, feeling her pulse quicken. "You remember Bryce from the league?" "Yeah, that's him." Evelyn took another deep breath. "He invited me to dinner on Friday, and I think I want to go." Mallory blinked, not quite sure what was going on. "You mean like a date?" "Yeah." She looked him straight in the eye for the first time. "Like a date, but it doesn't change anything between us, really. It's just, an experiment, maybe. I don't know exactly what to call it." The room seemed to freeze. Mallory felt something cold spill into his chest. But instead of the anger or pain he'd expected, he felt a strange calmness, as if a part of him had been waiting for something like this for a long time, sensing that their relationship was moving toward a tipping point. "You want an open marriage, like Fiona's friends?" he asked in an even voice. "I'm not sure exactly what I want," Evelyn answered honestly. "It's just that lately I've been feeling like we're both missing something. It's like we're stuck in a routine. Maybe a little variety would help us both." Mallory was silent for so long that Evelyn started to get even more nervous. "Say something, please," she finally asked. "I think," he said slowly, "that if you want to go out with Bryce, I won't stop you." Now it was Evelyn's turn to be surprised. "Really?" "Yeah," Mallory straightened up and looked at her with an expression she couldn't exactly decipher. And there's this woman at the gym, Willow. She's been showing interest in me for a long time. I think I might ask her out on Friday, too. Evelyn froze, clearly not expecting that answer. Something akin to alarm flashed across her face, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Of course, if you want," she said with a strained smile. "That would be fair. Then it's a deal." Mallory rose from the couch. "I'm going to bed. I have to get up early tomorrow." He headed for the stairs, leaving Evelyn sitting in the living room with an unfinished glass of wine and a look of confusion on her face. As he climbed the stairs, Mallory was surprised at his own calmness. Perhaps, somewhere deep inside, he realized that their marriage had long been in need of some kind of jolt, a shake-up. Or maybe a part of him wanted to see how far Evelyn was willing to go in this game she'd started. As he lay in bed and listened to Evelyn pacing downstairs, hesitant to get up, he thought about a woman named Willow. She did exist, a group exercise coach who always greeted him in a friendly manner and sometimes held his gaze a little longer than necessary. Mallory had never seriously considered asking her out, but now that Evelyn had opened that door, he felt a strange mixture of anxiety and curiosity. Things will be different in the morning, he thought. Evelyn would probably change her mind, admit it was a stupid idea. But even if she didn't, maybe they both needed to go through this to figure out what they really wanted out of their marriage. With that thought, he closed his eyes, marveling at how one sentence could change the direction of their lives so quickly. Evelyn stayed up most of the night. She lay on the very edge of their shared bed, listening to Mallory's steady breathing. How could he sleep so soundly? How could he so easily agree to her proposal and even put forward a counter-proposal? In her mind, this wasn't how it was all supposed to go down. When she dared to talk to him about dating Bryce, she'd expected a very different reaction. Protests, outrage, maybe even jealousy. Anything but this calm acceptance and counter-proposal. Willow. Who was this Willow anyway? Evelyn had never heard of her before, so Mallory was keeping it from her that some woman was showing interest in him. How long had this been going on? Morning came suddenly. Evelyn hadn't even noticed she dozed off into the morning. The alarm clock had rung as usual, but this morning everything seemed different. Mallory was no longer in bed. She heard the sound of water from the bathroom. He was taking a shower, which in itself was unusual. He usually preferred to shower in the evening after returning from his dusty workshop. Going down to the kitchen, she found that the coffee was ready, but there was no toast on the table. Mallory appeared 15 minutes later, dressed and smelling not of his usual aftershave, but of something new she'd bought him for Christmas, but he'd never used, claiming the smell was too strong for the workshop. "Good morning," he said, pouring himself a coffee. "Sorry, I didn't have time to make breakfast. I have to stop by the store before work." "What store?" Evelyn stared at him, not sure what was going on. "There's a new clothing store in Mall East. I want to stop by before work to check out the new collection." Since when was Mallory interested in new clothing collections? She usually bought him things because he hated shopping. What about breakfast in the workshop? Didn't Liam bring donuts on Wednesdays? "He does," he smiled, but in a different way than usual. "But I thought it was time to cut back on the donuts. At 37, my metabolism isn't what it used to be." Evelyn blinked. Mallory had never mentioned metabolism before, and he certainly hadn't given up donuts. She wanted to ask, "By the way, I'm going to be late today," Mallory said, finishing his coffee. The guys and I have a strength training session at the gym after work. Strength training? Evelyn couldn't hide her surprise now. Since when do you go to group exercise? Since last week, he shrugged. There was just no occasion to mention it. It's just an hour after work, twice a week. And this Willow, she's leading these workouts? Mallory looked at her with a slight smile. Yes, she's a trainer, a very professional one. He walked over to the sink, rinsed his cup and put it in the dryer, also an atypical gesture of mindfulness for him. All right, I've got to go. I'll see you tonight. And he left, leaving Evelyn sitting at the kitchen table at a complete loss. What was happening to her husband? What was happening to their lives? Just yesterday morning, everything had been so clear and there was another surprise waiting for her at the office. Bryce caught her at the coffee machine. "Hi," he said with that special smile he saved just for her. "Have you thought about Friday?" Evelyn felt herself blush. What should she answer? That yes, her husband had surprisingly easily agreed to let her go on a date with another man? That, what's more, he's going on a date with some trainer himself? "Yes, she stammered. "I can go." "Great." Bryce brightened up. "I made reservations at Olive for 8. Have you heard of that place?" Oliva was a new Mediterranean restaurant that had opened downtown a couple months ago. Fancy place that was hard to get into without a reservation. "Yeah, I heard. It's a good place. See you Friday then." Bryce winked at her and walked away, leaving her alone with a cup of cooling coffee and a growing sense of anxiety. All day she couldn't concentrate on her work. Her thoughts kept returning to Mallory and his strange behavior this morning, to that mysterious Willow he'd never mentioned before, to the upcoming Friday. What was she even trying to prove with this experiment? When she'd first talked to Mallory about open marriage, she hadn't had a concrete plan. It was more of an impulsive decision, sparked by her conversation with Fiona and a growing sense that their marriage was stalled. Bryce had actually asked her out a week ago, and she'd said no. But after that, she'd started thinking, what if? What if she tried something new? More than that, somewhere deep inside, a part of her wanted to see Mallory's reaction, wanted him to show signs that he still cared about her, still was jealous, still cared enough to say no. But he didn't. Instead, he accepted the rules of the game and seemed intent on playing by them even more enthusiastically than she was. After lunch, she couldn't stand it and texted him, "How's your day going?" The reply didn't come until an hour later. "Fine. Lots of work. Don't expect me for dinner. I'll be late." No emoticon, no question about her day. Just information. She felt a prick of disappointment that she immediately tried to suppress. After all, hadn't she started all this? Hadn't she suggested changing the rules of their marriage? Evelyn returned home earlier than usual. The empty house greeted her with silence. She made dinner for one and sat at the table, looking at the empty chair across from her. In the past, when Mallory was late, she'd often relished the chance to spend the evening alone, to watch a show he didn't like, to take a long bath with a book. But tonight the house seemed too big and too quiet. She pulled out her phone and checked to see if there were any messages from him. Nothing. She opened Instagram, surprised to find that his page, usually inactive for weeks at a time, had updated. The new photo was selfies at the gym, with the exercise equipment in the background. Mallory looked unaccustomedly serious, even a little stern, his hair damp with sweat, his t-shirt tight around his shoulders, which seemed wider than she remembered. Under the photo was the Evelyn blinked in surprise. In 5 years of marriage, Mallory had posted selfies maybe 5 times, and that was at her insistence. And now this? And what did New Horizons mean? She scrolled through the comments and froze when she saw a response from user at Willow Fitness. "Great job today. Progress is already noticeable." Clicking through to that account's page, Evelyn saw a young woman with long blonde hair gathered into a ponytail and a body that was clearly the result of years of training. Willow Ramirez, 29 years old, personal trainer and group program instructor. Judging from the photos, she led an active lifestyle, hiking, rock climbing, some kind of sporting events. In many photos, she was with friends, often in the arms of different people, men and women, sociable, energetic. Evelyn felt a strange feeling come over her, a mixture of envy and anxiety. Willow was the type of woman she would never compare herself to. Their lives were too different, their values and interests probably too. But right now, leafing through her profile, Evelyn couldn't help but think, what did Mallory see in her? What attracted him to her? Her energy? Her youth? Her carefree attitude? The phone in her hand suddenly vibrated, making her flinch. A message from Bryce. Looking forward to Friday. You're going to love Olive, I promise. Evelyn put the phone screen down, suddenly feeling tired. What was she doing? What was all this for? The thought of going to a restaurant with Bryce no longer seemed as appealing as it used to. Yes, he was an interesting conversationalist, intelligent, with a good sense of humor. In the office, their conversations had always been filled with some special energy, almost flirtatious. But now, imagining a real date with him, she felt only nervousness and doubt. Maybe she should cancel the whole thing. Call Mallory and tell her it was a stupid idea, that she didn't want to risk their marriage for an experiment. But something was stopping her. Pride? Fear of appearing weak? Or maybe a part of her still wanted to see how far Mallory was willing to take this game. Evelyn went to bed before Mallory got home. She heard him enter the bedroom quietly after midnight, how he carefully lay down on his side of the bed, careful not to wake her. She pretended to be asleep, though she had actually been lying awake for hours. He smelled of some unfamiliar deodorant and faintly a woman's perfume. Or was she imagining it? Thursday morning was little different from the previous morning. Mallory was up before her again, showered before breakfast again. He still made toast this time, but he ate reluctantly, more checking something on his phone. "Practice today, too?" Evelyn asked, trying to sound casual. "No, just work today," he answered, not looking up from the screen. Dexter was his co-worker from the shop, with whom they occasionally spent evenings drinking beer and watching sports. Mallory usually gave advance notice of these plans and often joked that he wouldn't mind getting away from the domestic routine for a couple hours. Hadn't he said he had a move-in next week? Evelyn herself didn't know why she'd asked that question. It sounded like suspicion, though she tried to give it a tone of simple curiosity. Mallory finally looked up from the phone and looked at her. "There's been a change of plans. Why?" "Nothing. Just asking." She looked away. "I can cook something for dinner if you don't come home too late." "No need. I'll eat with Dexter." He got up from the table. "I'm running late tonight. I'll see you tonight." There was that unfamiliar smell of aftershave again, and the new shirt Evelyn was sure she hadn't bought him that dark blue plaid shirt that emphasized the color of his eyes. "Mallory," she called out to him when he was already at the door, "about Friday." He turned around, his gaze attentive but betraying no emotion. "What about Friday?" Evelyn wanted to say that she'd changed her mind, that she didn't want to go out with Bryce, that the whole thing was a stupid idea. But something in the look on her husband's face stopped her, like he was expecting her to back down, like he was testing her resolve. "Nothing. I just wanted to remind you," she said instead of what she was about to say. "So you don't forget your plans." "I won't," he smiled slightly. Willow had already made reservations at Blue Jazz. Blue Jazz was one of the most romantic restaurants in town, with live music and dim lighting. She and Mallory had only been there once, for their wedding anniversary 3 years ago, and he'd said then that the place was too pretentious for his taste. Evelyn felt her heart skip a beat. "I see," was all she could say. "Have a good day." The door closed, and she was alone. There were dozens of questions running through her mind, but the main one was, how could everything have changed so quickly? Until 2 days ago, her husband had been a predictable, sometimes even boring man who preferred routine and comfort to any adventure. Now he was posting selfies from the gym. At the office, work wasn't going well again. Bryce sent her a text asking if he would pick her up or if they would meet at the restaurant. Evelyn replied that she would come herself, leaving herself an escape route. She still wasn't sure if she really wanted to go on this date. At lunch, Fiona noticed her absent-mindedness. "Is everything okay?" she asked, taking a bite out of her vegetarian sandwich. "You seem a little jumpy today." Evelyn almost told her about her situation, but changed her mind at the last moment. What would she say? That she offered her husband an open marriage and now she regretted it? That she was testing him and instead he surprised her with his willingness to commit to a new relationship? "I'm fine. I just didn't sleep well," she lied. "How are you doing?" "Actually, not very good. It seems Daniel has fallen in love with one of his, what do they call it, partner. And now Alexa's jealous even though they agreed she shouldn't be. Anyway, it's complicated." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. This was it. Exactly what she'd been dreading without even admitting it to herself. What if Mallory really did get infatuated with this Willow? What if one date turned into something more? "But that's a rare occasion, isn't it?" she asked with hope in her voice. "Do relationships like this usually work?" Fiona thought for a moment. "Honestly, I don't know. Besides Alexa and Daniel, I know another couple, and they had problems too. Maybe it takes a special kind of character, or a special relationship. I personally wouldn't be able to do that. Too jealous." Evelyn nodded, feeling her anxiety growing. Wasn't she the same way? Hadn't she been jealous as soon as Mallory showed interest in another woman, and she was the one who'd started it? She opened that door. She was alone again that evening. Mallory had written to say that helping Dexter was taking too long and he was staying with him for dinner. Evelyn wandered aimlessly around the house, trying to occupy herself with something. Turned on the television but couldn't focus on what was happening on the screen. She tried to read, but the words wouldn't form sentences. I checked my phone to see if there were any messages from my husband. She refreshed Instagram to see if there were any new photos of him. Finally, she stopped in front of her bedroom mirror and took a long look at her reflection. At 35, she still looked attractive. Brown hair with melting, which she did every 2 months, slim figure, kept in shape not so much by sports as by constant busyness and irregular meals. But the look was tired, and there were wrinkles around her eyes that she hadn't noticed before. Evelyn opened her closet and started going through her clothes, thinking about tomorrow's date. What to wear, what to say to Bryce, and most importantly, what did she really want? Go on this date to spite Mallory? To prove to herself that she's still attractive? Or is there some part of her that really wants to get to know Bryce better, to try something new? She remembered his compliments at work, his attentiveness, the way he always remembered what kind of coffee she drank, and how he'd once brought her favorite chocolate when she'd mentioned she'd had a rough day. Bryce was an attractive man and seemed genuinely interested in her, not just as a co-worker, but as a woman. When was the last time Mallory had shown such interest? When was the last time he'd noticed a new hairstyle or dress? But is it worth it? Is it worth risking 5 years of marriage for an experiment? For the sake of proving something to a husband who didn't seem to mind their new arrangement at all? Mallory returned about 11 o'clock. Evelyn was already in bed but awake, looking something up on her phone. He looked tired, but not exhausted from the hard work, but rather satisfied, like, "How was the move?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "It was fine." He took off his shirt and tossed it into the dirty laundry basket. Dexter, as usual, hadn't had time to pack half the stuff, so I had to help with that too. He spoke in a casual tone, but there was something in his eyes that made her doubt. Or was she just looking for a reason to be suspicious? "What were you doing?" he asked, clearly out of politeness rather than genuine interest. "Nothing much," she answered. "I was working, and then I watched a soap opera." When he returned, he smelled of minty toothpaste and the same unfamiliar deodorant. She watched him lie down on his side of the bed, leaving a space between them as usual. The gap hadn't seemed so significant before. Now, it was like an abyss. "Mallory," she began, not knowing what she wanted to say. "Yes?" He turned to her, his eyes wary. Evelyn opened her mouth, but no words came out. What did she want to ask? "Are you really going on a date with another woman? Or do you still love me? Or maybe, let's forget this stupid idea and go back to our normal lives?" "Nothing," she said finally. "Good night. Good night." He turned off his lamp and turned away. Evelyn lay in the dark, looking up at the ceiling. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow was the point of no return. And though her whole being screamed that this was a mistake, that she had to stop before it was too late, pride and some twisted curiosity wouldn't let her back down. She had to see how far Mallory was willing to go, had to find out if their marriage really meant anything to him. And if it did, he would stop this madness. And if not, well, maybe that was a kind of answer, too. Friday came all too quickly. Evelyn awoke to the sound of the alarm clock and found Mallory already up. Through the ajar bathroom door came the sound of an electric razor. She sat on the edge of the bed, gathering her thoughts. Today was the day. The day they both have to go on dates with other people. The thought made an unpleasant chill form in her. Breakfast passed in a strange silence. Mallory was unusually focused on his phone, and Evelyn couldn't think of anything to say. The usual phrases like, "have a good day," seemed out of place now, almost fake. "What time will you be back today?" she finally asked when he was about to leave. Mallory shrugged. "I don't know. Late, I guess. Don't wait up for me." And he left, leaving her alone with a cup of cold coffee and a growing sense of unease. The day at work dragged on interminably. Bryce approached her twice, confirming the details of their evening meeting. Evelyn answered him with a mechanical smile, not taking in what he said. Her thoughts were occupied with something else entirely. She imagined Mallory at Blue Jazz with this Willow, imagining them sitting at a table in the dim light, him looking at her with the same eyes he'd once looked at Evelyn. The thoughts made her physically ache. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she knew she wasn't going on a date with Bryce. She couldn't. This whole open marriage thing suddenly seemed like a monstrous mistake. But how to call the whole thing off without losing face? How to admit to Mallory that this was a test that had gotten out of hand? At 4, she texted Bryce. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to cancel tonight. I'm not feeling well." Technically, it wasn't a lie. She was really sick at the thought of what was happening to her marriage. Bryce replied almost immediately, "That's okay. Get better. Shall we reschedule?" Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't know if there would be another day, whether there would be anything at all after tonight. She returned home earlier than usual. The empty house greeted her with a silence that now seemed oppressive. She walked to the bedroom and saw that Mallory had already prepared his clothes for tonight, the dark gray jacket she'd given him last Christmas that he'd never worn, a new shirt, dark jeans. There was an unfamiliar bottle of toilet water on the bedside table. Evelyn sat on the bed, feeling a lump rise to her throat. What had she done? When had their lives taken this turn that had brought them here? Mallory got home from work around 6. He looked a little surprised to see her home. "I thought you'd be getting ready for your out," he said, taking off his work jacket. "I canceled," Evelyn replied, watching his reaction. "I don't feel so good." He nodded but made no comment on her decision. Was there something like relief in his eyes? Or was it just her imagination? "And you?" she asked. "Are you still coming?" "Yes," he glanced at his watch. "I have to get ready. I've already made a reservation." Evelyn wanted to say something, ask him to stay, admit that the whole idea was a mistake, but her pride wouldn't let her. She watched him silently as he went to shower, as he dressed carefully, as he splashed toilet water on his wrists. He looked better than he had in years, trim, confident, almost unfamiliar. When the front door closed behind him, she was alone in the empty house. The silence pressed on her ears. Evelyn walked aimlessly from room to room, not knowing what to occupy herself with. Her gaze fell on a framed photograph of them together, their wedding 5 years ago. They are both smiling, looking at each other with love and hope. What had happened to those people in the picture? Evelyn remembered that day as clearly as if it were yesterday. A small ceremony in a city park, just close friends and family. She wore a simple white dress she'd found at a vintage store and fell in love with at first sight. Mallory wore a suit that was a little big in the shoulders, but he looked so happy that no one paid attention to the small imperfections. After the ceremony, they had a picnic right there in the park. They drank champagne out of plastic cups, ate homemade sandwiches Mallory's mom had made, and danced to music from a portable speaker. It wasn't the lavish wedding from glossy magazines, but for them, it was perfect. In the evening, they returned to their small rented apartment, tired but happy. Mallory picked her up in his arms on the doorstep and carried her inside, laughing at how he almost banged his elbow on the door jamb. They were young, in love, full of plans for the future. When exactly had that changed? When had they stopped looking at each other the way they did in that picture? Evelyn poured herself a glass of wine and sat in the living room staring into the void. She remembered their first year of marriage, how they'd furnished the apartment, finding furniture at garage sales and thrift stores, how they'd planned trips together, saving money from each paycheck, how they'd spent weekends exploring the Ashfield neighborhood or just lying in bed until noon, talking about everything. Then came the career changes. Evelyn got promoted in the company, started working more, often brought work home. Mallory was moving up in the shop too, though more slowly. They bought a house, not the biggest, but their own, with a small yard and a veranda. It seemed such an accomplishment, such a step forward. But somewhere in the process, they had lost something important. Maybe it was the routine that gradually consumed their relationship. Or was it that they had stopped having real conversations, sharing their dreams and fears? Evelyn remembered their last real conversation about the future. It had been about 2 years ago, when they had discussed having a child. They had talked about it seriously, weighing the pros and cons, planning finances, imagining how their lives would change. But then the conversation somehow quieted down, turned into everyday worries, and they never returned to this topic. They had once dreamed of a family, of children running around their yard. Evelyn glanced at her watch, 8:30. Mallory and Willow should be sitting at Blue Jazz by now, listening to live music, talking, maybe laughing. What does he tell her? Does he talk about his wife, his marriage? Or does he act like that part of his life doesn't exist? She imagined the two of them, Mallory in a gray jacket, Willow probably wearing something bright and sporty, her blonde hair gathered in a high ponytail or loose around her shoulders. They talk about sports, fitness, healthy living, all things that Evelyn had never been particularly interested in. Suddenly she wondered what had attracted Mallory to her 5 years ago. What did he see in the serious office worker who liked order and planning? Maybe it was the opposite of their natures that had been the attraction. He was creative, hands-on, living in the moment. She was organized, strategic, always looking ahead. Once these differences had complemented each other. Now they only seemed to increase the distance between them. Evelyn poured herself a second glass of wine and turned on the television, trying to distract herself from thoughts of her husband and his date. But no show could keep her attention. She kept checking her phone to see if Mallory had texted or posted something on Instagram. Time stretched agonizingly slow. At 10, she went up to the bedroom, showered, changed into her pajamas. Everything as usual, but with the feeling that nothing usual would ever happen again. That tonight was the watershed after which their lives would change forever. Lying in bed, she thought back to other Friday nights when she and Mallory had ordered pizza and watched movies wrapped up in plaid, when they'd had a candlelit dinner at home because they were too tired to go out, when they just talked, lying in the dark, holding hands. When did all these simple things stop bringing joy? When did they start taking them for granted, as part of a routine, rather than small expressions of love? Through her half-sleep, Evelyn heard the sound of the front door opening. She glanced at the clock, almost midnight. Mallory had returned. She tensed, listening to his footsteps downstairs, to the sound of the refrigerator opening and closing, to the quiet footsteps on the stairs. The bedroom door opened and he walked in, still in the same gray jacket but with his shirt collar unbuttoned. He smelled of the same perfume and, faintly, of women's perfume. Evelyn closed her eyes, pretending to be asleep. She wasn't ready to talk, didn't know what to say, what to ask. Mallory She listened to his breathing, gradually becoming even and deep, and thought about the fact that tomorrow they would have to talk. They would have to decide what to do next, with their marriage, with their lives, with this strange experiment that she herself had started and which now seemed to be completely out of control. But that would be tomorrow. And now, in the darkness of night, she could only lie beside the man who had once been the closest thing to her in the world, and feel sleep at last mercifully taking her away from a reality that was proving too painful. Evelyn awoke to the sound of dishes being moved in the kitchen. She lay still for a few seconds, trying to gather her thoughts. The clock read 8 in the morning. She had slept longer than usual. Memories of last night came flooding back to her with renewed vigor. Mallory and his date, her canceled meeting with Bryce, their strange experiment that seemed to have gone too far. She forced herself to get up and go to the bathroom. The mirror reflected her tired face with dark circles under her eyes. Despite her long sleep, she felt completely wrecked. After washing her face and brushing her teeth, Evelyn pulled on her homemade pants and an old t-shirt, ready for the conversation she and Mallory couldn't put off any longer. In the kitchen, Mallory was making breakfast. "Good morning," he said, keeping his eyes on the stove. "Morning," Evelyn replied, walking over to the coffee pot. "You're up early for Saturday." "Couldn't sleep," he shrugged. "Decided to make something normal for breakfast." Evelyn poured herself some coffee and sat at the table, watching her husband's movements. Something had changed in him during the night, some new calmness, a determination she hadn't noticed before. "How was your evening?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Mallory turned off the fire and put the scrambled eggs on 2 plates. "It was all right," he answered briefly. "And you?" "I told you I canceled my date," Evelyn reminded him. "Oh, yeah." He put the plates on the table and sat down across from her. "You weren't feeling—" "Mallory," she began, "we need to talk about what's going on." He nodded, cutting off a piece of bacon. "Yes, we do need to talk." There was something in his eyes that she couldn't read. Determination, tiredness, maybe even sadness. He looked like he'd made some big decision and was now just waiting for the right moment to let her know. "I think this idea of an open marriage was a mistake," Evelyn said, deciding to start at the beginning. "I'm not sure we both realized what we were getting into." Mallory chewed slowly, looking at her carefully. "Why did you suggest it in the first place?" he finally asked. "What were you trying to prove?" The question caught her off guard. There was a subtext in it that she couldn't quite grasp. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Maybe I felt like we needed to make a change, that we were stuck in a rut. And you decided that the best way to get out of the routine was to go on a date with a coworker." There was no anger in his voice, just tiredness and something akin to frustration. "It was probably stupid," Evelyn admitted. I didn't think you'd react like that you'd go right ahead and offer the same thing." "How was I supposed to react?" She fell silent, not knowing what to say. How did she expect him to react? Anger, jealousy, prohibition. All of those options suddenly seemed so immature, so manipulative. "I don't know," she said finally, "but not like this." Mallory set his fork aside and looked at her directly. "Evelyn, I've been thinking about this all night. The truth is, I have no idea what's going on in your head, but I do know that I don't want to be in a relationship where—" The words hit her like a slap in the face, a test of strength. Isn't that what she was doing? Wasn't that what she wanted, to see how far he was willing to go before he said no? "I wasn't testing you," she tried to argue, but her voice sounded unsure even to herself. "No?" Mallory raised an eyebrow. "Then what was it? Did you really want to go on a date with that—what's his name? Bryce. Bryce. Did you really want to do that? Or did you want to see how I'd react?" Evelyn lowered her eyes. A lump clenched in her throat, preventing her from speaking. He saw through her, saw what she didn't want to admit. "I don't know," she whispered. "Maybe it's both." Mallory sighed. "You see what the problem is? Instead of just telling me that you lacked attention or passion or whatever, you decided to make a circus of it. Make me jealous, make me worry, manipulate me." Every word hit her in the heart, because it was true. She really wanted to see his jealousy, his worry. She wanted to see if he still cared about her, about their marriage. "What about your date?" she asked, trying to steer the conversation in another direction. With that, Willow? Mallory looked at her for a long moment as if deciding whether to answer. "We had a good time," he said finally. "She's an interesting person. Smart, open. We talked about a lot of things." "Like what?" Evelyn didn't want to know, but she couldn't help asking. "Travel. About books. About what we want out of life." He paused. "I told her about us. About our... And what did she say?" "She asked me why I wanted to do this. Why date her if I'm married?" He smiled weakly. "That's a good question, isn't it?" Evelyn felt her heart skip a beat. "And what did you answer?" "That, I don't know. That maybe I'm trying to figure out if there's more beyond what we have now." He looked her straight in the eyes. "Or maybe just trying to prove something to myself. And you." There was a heavy pause. Birds sang outside the window and a dog barked somewhere in the distance. An ordinary Saturday morning that would never be ordinary again. "Mallory," Evelyn began, feeling her voice tremble. "I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our marriage. This experiment was a mistake, I realize that now." He looked at her for a long time, and in his eyes she saw so many emotions: sadness, fatigue, disappointment, and maybe, somewhere deep down, remnants of the love that had once bound them together. "The problem is, Evelyn, it's not about this experiment," he said quietly. "It's about what led us to it. The fact that you chose this way to test my feelings instead of just talking to me." He got up from the table and walked to the window, looking out over their small, still unkept backyard. "You know what I was thinking about last night? About when exactly we stopped talking to each other, when our marriage became this, routine that you were so eager to destroy." Evelyn was silent, not knowing what to say. Her insides clenched in anticipation of what was to come next. "I think we need a break," Mallory said, still looking out the window. "Or maybe something more definitive. Are you talking about a divorce?" Her voice was barely audible. He turned toward her, and now she could see that his eyes were red, as if he'd been up all night. "Yes, Evelyn. I'm talking about the divorce." The words hung in the air, heavy, irrevocable, as if their very utterance made them a reality that now had to be lived with. "But why?" she asked, feeling the tears come to her eyes. Evelyn felt tears roll down her cheeks. She couldn't hold them back, didn't want to hold them back. Everything was suddenly so clear, so painfully obvious. "I didn't mean it," she said through her tears. I wanted you to show me that you still cared, that you're still jealous, that I was still important to you. And you thought the best way to find out was to offer me an open marriage." There was no anger in his voice, just tiredness and bewilderment. "Instead of just asking me if you still mattered to me?" Evelyn didn't answer. What could she say? That she didn't believe his answer would be sincere? That she was afraid to hear the truth? That it was easier to set up this test than to have a real conversation? "You know what the saddest part is?" Mallory continued after a pause. "I love you, Evelyn. I've loved you all along. But in the last few days I've realized something important. I deserve better. I deserve a relationship based on trust, not games and manipulation." Those words hit the hardest. I deserve better. Not we deserve better. Not our marriage deserves better. Him. Alone. Without her. "Mallory, please." She rose from the table, taking a step toward him. "Let's try again. Let's have a real conversation like you wanted. Maybe counseling. You didn't." He looked at her with a sad smile. "What else would you call it? You suggested something you didn't really want, hoping for a reaction." When you didn't get one, you panicked and backed off. That's manipulation, Evelyn. He was right, and that realization came upon her with full force. She really was manipulating him, testing his love, playing with their relationship as if it were some kind of game rather than living, real feelings. "I'll get a motel room for a while," Mallory said, heading for the stairs. "I need to think about things, and I think you do too." "You're leaving? Now?" Evelyn felt panic overwhelm her. "But we haven't even finished talking." "I think we've said enough for today," he replied, climbing the stairs. "I need to get my things together." Evelyn stayed in the kitchen listening to him pacing upstairs, opening and closing drawers, rustling packages. It was like a nightmare. Just yesterday she had a husband, a home, a future. Today it was all falling apart and there was nothing she could do to stop the fall. When Mallory came downstairs with a small gym bag, she was waiting for him at the front door. "Please don't go," she said, unable to hide her tears. "Let's just sit down and talk, a real talk." He stopped in front of her and she saw that his eyes were moist too. "Not now, Evelyn. I need time. And so do you. Time to think about what we really want and whether we can still trust each other." "But will you come back?" she asked, clutching at this last straw of hope. "I'll contact you in a few days. We'll need to discuss practical matters if you still want a divorce." "I don't want a divorce," she exclaimed. "I never have." "Then why did you start all this?" he asked with bitterness in his voice. "Why did you risk what we had?" Without waiting for an answer, he walked out, closing the door behind him. Evelyn slowly sank to the floor right there in the hallway, unable to move any further. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't notice them. His words rolled around in her head. Why did you have to risk what we had? And really, why? Because of boredom? Because of insecurity about his feelings? Because of wanting to control the situation, to control him? Maybe it was because somewhere deep down inside she'd never truly believed she deserved his love. That all this time she'd been waiting for a catch, for proof that he didn't really care for her that much. And instead of just talking to him about those fears, she'd set up this test that ended up destroying the very thing she was so afraid of losing. The irony of the situation didn't escape her. She was so afraid of losing control that she ended up losing everything. It began to rain outside, a light spring rain pounding on the roof of the house that now seemed too big and too empty. Evelyn sat on the floor, listening to the sound and thinking that sometimes the things we are most afraid of losing, we destroy with our own fears and insecurities. Her phone vibrated somewhere in the kitchen. A message from Bryce. "How are you feeling today? Should we reschedule our meeting for this evening?" Evelyn didn't answer. She had nothing to say to Bryce or anyone else. All the words that really mattered had to be said to Mallory. And now that she finally realized it, it was probably too late. It had been a week since Mallory had left. 7 days filled with silence, loneliness, and endless reflection. Evelyn had taken time off work, citing a family emergency. She couldn't bring herself to go to the office to see Bryce, to answer the usual questions from her coworkers. All she cared about was whether Mallory would come home. He called her on the third day, voice sounding detached, almost official. Said he was staying at the Pinewood Motel on the outskirts of Ashfield, that he needed a little more time to think things over, asked how she was. Evelyn wanted to say she was falling apart, that she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, that every corner of their home reminded her of him and what she might have lost forever. Instead, she said she was fine, that she understood his need for space, that she would wait as long as it took. On the seventh day, the doorbell rang. Evelyn opened it, already knowing who it was. Mallory stood on the doorstep, slimmer, with stubble on his face, but with the same determined expression in his eyes with which he had left a week before. "May I come in?" he asked. "We need to talk." She nodded silently, taking a step to the side. Mallory walked into their house, which now seemed unfamiliar, as if its very atmosphere had changed during the week. "I've made a decision," he said, stopping in the middle of the living room and turning to her. "I have filed for divorce." Evelyn felt the ground go from under her feet. She had expected this, had been preparing for this all week, but hearing those words out loud was far more painful than she could have imagined. "Mallory, please," she began, taking a step toward him. "Let's at least give it a try. Counseling, couples therapy." "I've already made up my mind, Evelyn." His voice was quiet but firm. "It's not about what therapy can fix. It's about what I've realized over this week, thinking about us, about our marriage." He made his way to the couch and sat down, gesturing for her to do the same. Evelyn obeyed, keeping her distance between them. "What did you realize?" she asked, trying to keep her voice from shaking. Mallory took a deep breath as if preparing for a long and difficult conversation. "I realized that for the last few years we had been living in some strange equilibrium. It was as if we were both afraid of upsetting the established order. You were immersed in your work, I was immersed in my workshop. We stopped having real conversations, stopped sharing our dreams, our fears. We became housemates, not partners." Evelyn listened without interrupting. Every word he said resonated inside her with a painful recognition of a truth she preferred to ignore. "But most importantly, I realized that you don't trust me," he continued. "And I guess you never really did. Why else would you have set up this test? Why try to manipulate my feelings instead of just talking to me?" "I didn't," Evelyn argued, but it sounded unconvincing even to herself. "You weren't?" He looked at her with a sad smile. "What else would you call it? You offered to go on a date with another man, expecting me to be jealous, to beg you not to. When I instead agreed and suggested the same thing, you panicked. Isn't that manipulation?" Evelyn lowered her head. He was right, and it was pointless to deny it. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "I guess it was manipulation. I wanted to see that you still cared about me, still jealous, that I was still important to you. And instead of just asking me that, you decided to test me that way." He shook his head. "You know what the saddest part is? I've loved you all this time, but you didn't believe." The word loved, past tense, hit her the hardest. "So he doesn't love her anymore? It's over?" "Mallory, please," she reached out, trying to take his hand, but he pulled away. "I've made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But can one mistake undo 5 years together?" "It's not about one mistake, Evelyn." He looked her straight in the eye. "It's about what led to that mistake. Your mistrust, your need to control, to test. My inability to see it before. We're both to blame for letting our marriage get to this point." Evelyn felt tears come to her eyes, but tried to hold them back. She didn't want to appear weak, didn't want him to see her tears as another attempt at manipulation. "Have you been seeing her again?" she asked suddenly. "With Willow?" Mallory looked at her in surprise. "No, that date was the first and last." "But you said you had a good time." "I did. She's a smart and interesting woman, but that doesn't mean I wanted to pursue a relationship with her." "Then why?" Evelyn didn't understand. "If you're not interested in her, why do you still want a divorce?" Mallory sighed. Because this isn't about Willow. This is about you and me, about what happened, about what brought us to this point. What I've realized this week is that I no longer want to be in a relationship where I'm tested, where I'm not trusted, where games and manipulation are used instead of conversation. His words hit like hammer blows, shattering the last vestiges of hope. "And there's no way to fix it?" she asked, knowing the answer but still not ready to accept it. "I don't know." He looked uncertain for the first time. "Maybe in time. But right now, I don't see how we can go back to the way things were. Too much has been destroyed." He stood up, signaling that the conversation was coming to an end. "I'll pick up the rest of my stuff next week if that's okay with you. And my lawyer will contact you about the paperwork." Lawyer, the papers. It sounded so final, so cold and official. "Mallory." She stood up too, unable to just let him go, to let their marriage go. "Before you go, tell me the truth. Was there anything I could have done differently? Was there anything that could have saved us?" He paused at the door, thinking for a moment. "I think we both could have done a lot of things differently," he said at last. "I could have been more careful, more open. You could have just talked to me about your fears and doubts instead of checking up on me. We both could have tried to recapture what we had between us in the beginning instead of letting the routine consume us." He looked at her with a sad smile. "But you know what the saddest part is? I think we both knew something was wrong, but were afraid to admit it. Afraid that admitting the problem would be the first step to solving it, and the solution might be painful. So we just went with the flow, hoping things would somehow work themselves out." Evelyn realized that he was right. She did feel that their marriage was slowly fading away, but she preferred to ignore it, immersing herself in work, in everyday life, pretending that everything was normal. And when she finally decided to do something about it, she chose the most destructive way possible. "I'm going to miss you," Mallory said, suddenly soft. "The way we used to be." "Me too," Evelyn whispered, unable to hold back her tears. "I miss you already." He nodded as if he understood, as if he felt the same way. Then he opened the door and walked out without looking back. Evelyn was left standing in the middle of the living room, listening to the hushed sound of his footsteps. She sank slowly onto the couch, feeling tears streaming down her cheeks. Her mind reeled with his words, his explanation, his goodbye. But what struck her most was the realization of her own guilt in destroying their marriage. This whole scheme with the open marriage, with testing his feelings, what was that if not an attempt to control the situation, to control him? Instead of just telling him her fears and insecurities, she decided to test him, and ended up losing everything she'd tried to keep. Evelyn thought back to the night it had all started. That moment when she had decided to talk about an open marriage, about her date with Bryce. At the time, she'd thought it would be a good way to shake up their relationship, to see Mallory's reaction, to see if he still cared for her. How wrong she'd been. Now, looking back, she saw how selfish and manipulative the act had been. She didn't think about his feelings, about how hurt he would be to hear that his wife wanted to go on a date with another man. She was only thinking about what she wanted to get from him, confirmation of his love, his jealousy, his concern. And when he didn't react the way she expected, when he instead accepted her proposal and put forward his own, she panicked. Because suddenly, the game she'd started was out of her control. because for the first time in a long time, Mallory had done something she hadn't expected, hadn't planned for. Evelyn stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the street her husband had. It was ironic. She was so afraid of losing his love that, in an attempt to test that love, she had destroyed it completely. She was so afraid their marriage would drown in routine that she herself had pushed him to the brink. The phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from Bryce. "Haven't seen you at work all week. Everything okay? Maybe we can have lunch together on Monday?" Evelyn looked at the message with a bitter chuckle. He still didn't realize that he was just a pawn in her game. A game she'd lost, losing the most precious thing she had. She didn't answer. Instead, she put the phone away and walked to the kitchen where the two mugs, hers and Mallory's, still stood. It was as if a part of him was still here, in this house, in these small, everyday details. Evelyn knew she had a long road ahead of her, a journey of acceptance, of realizing her mistakes and maybe of growing. She had lost Mallory, lost their marriage, but perhaps in that loss was a lesson she needed to learn. A lesson that true love is based on trust, not control. That relationships require honesty and openness, not games and manipulation. That sometimes the greatest threats to our happiness come not from the outside, but from within, from our own fears, insecurities, and inability to simply talk to a loved one. Now, standing alone in the kitchen of their soon-to-be no longer shared home, Evelyn realized, and in that attempt at control, she had lost everything. With her own hands, she destroyed what she was trying to keep. With her fears and insecurities, she had pushed away the man who truly loved her, despite all their problems. Evelyn put the mugs in the sink and began to wash them slowly, as if this simple ritual act could somehow organize the chaos in her life, in her thoughts. Water ran down her hands, washing away the remnants of coffee, but no amount of water could wash away the bitterness of realizing what she had done. "I deserve better," Mallory said, and he was right. He deserved a relationship based on trust and respect, not anxiety and control. Deserved a partner who valued his love, not tested it. Perhaps someday, Evelyn thought, she too would learn to deserve that kind of love, learn to trust without testing, to talk about her fears without testing, to love freely without trying to control. But right now, in this moment, all she could do was admit her mistake and try to move on with her life with the understanding that the most important lessons sometimes come through the most painful losses. Outside the window, a new day was beginning. The sun was rising over the rooftops of Ashfield, illuminating a world that seemed very different now. A world without Mallory, without their shared future, without the plans they had made together. A world in which she had to learn to live again, alone.